right, Matt, we finally made it to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Took a little bit, but we're here.
Yeah, I mean, what I've experienced is usually, I mean, schedules are like all over the place. Something keeps happening, but we've never had situations where we have to like reschedule more than once or twice. So I think we're perfect. We made it, and I'm glad that you're here on the podcast. And
hmm
while we were getting ready, you told me last week that you went and played some golf at Pinehurst. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. There were 12 of us that went down there. We played courses 8, 4, 3, and then on the final day we played number 2. So it was a lot of fun, challenging courses. Playing number 2 after being able to play 3 or 4 rounds was really nice because you don't start with the toughest one at the outset. And I actually had my best round there. So really
Oh, that's
good
good.
trip and a lot of fun overall.
Do you like golf often nowadays, or do you take the time to get out?
This year's been a little bit crazy, so it's been more challenging. I saw some escalation in my handicap, but yeah, I try and get out there during the summer, like once or twice a week when I can find the time. It's tough with kids though. And
Yeah.
this fall was we had travel baseball, so every Sunday was fully booked.
And it's amazing. I mean, it's good to know that you have something that centers you. And I never got into golf until like a few years ago when I had nothing else to do, and everybody was stuck at home. So golf course seemed like a place where you could get out to. So I went and started playing some golf, and now I love it because I just feel like you're playing against yourself more than you
hmm
play against other people. So it kind of helps you like keep getting better at the next shot and things like that. So also I've realized extremely frustrating game because you're like
That's true.
anywho. But I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It's a real honor to have you on. For everyone listening, of course we will give you an amazing introduction for you, but why don't you let the people know of what your role at Yext is and what you're doing that's super impactful right now.
Oh man, I don't know if there's anything I'm doing super impactful, but yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's excited to be here. So yeah, I'm vice president of software engineering here at Yext. So I kind of oversee all of our product engineering. Pretty much anything that our customers use that's not bespoke is developed by folks on my team. So yeah, the stuff that we're doing right now, I think there's been a lot of movement. We kind of are trying to see where our customers want us to provide more support, and what we're really seeing is kind of a return to our core focus, the areas that kind of customers came to us originally for. So our listings product, our reviews product, we're going to be bolstering the development on those, and we're really looking forward to it. We just did moved around some folks to try and add some additional horsepower to those areas. But yeah, that's kind of the big area that we're making an impact today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've been with Yext for almost 10 years now. And when I was just, preparing, I know you went from a software engineer director and now you're leading this team. So we'll dive more into like how that experience has been for you. But describe for me, what does Yext kind of do actually as a company? What are the products like? And how are people or companies, is it like a B2B product right now, or is it like a B2C? Kind of open that up for us.
hmm Yeah, so Yext is fully B2B. We work with companies of all sizes, so all the way down to like just single person SMBs, all the way up to companies, like Verizon or Samsung that are using us for a handful of different reasons. The thing that we started out doing was our listings product, and our listings product was all about, it was called Power Listings. And what that allowed companies to do was they'd sign up with Yext, they'd input all of their information about their different locations. So let's say it's like 7-Eleven or something like that. They've got thousands and thousands of locations. And then on top of that, you have thousands of sites where people can find that information. And the way that information is generally brought to those different sites is through aggregators. The problem with aggregators is that you don't really control that information. So what we did is we gave control back to the business so that what they could do is they put their information into our system, and then we relay that out to all the different publishers in our network. So that was how we started.
Wow.
And then in addition to that, what we started doing was using that to pull reviews, because a lot of these listing sites, what they have is they have reviews. So we started pulling that in and allowing people to respond to them. And we've kind of organically grown and added new products that were complementary to this set of products. But really, if you look at what drives the majority of our revenue, it's our listings product.
Nice. That's awesome. And I know you guys have expanded your portfolio to like have now like reviews, obviously, but you also have like platforms and pages and analytics and content. And you're trying to do some cool stuff with AI as well, which I'm curious to know. So is it like, is your software engineering team like focused on all these products across the board?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so most recently, I was mostly focused on our web publishing business, which is really was about the Pages product. But through our Pages product, we would also host our search product, which was a like kind of a first in market AI driven search product. And more recently, we've started adding in our uh, chat agent, which I think you've seen a lot of companies doing, because it does help lower support costs, increase customer satisfaction, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So we have a fully dedicated data science team that um, does all the research. They build models. Sometimes we work with external models. It's really just a question of what problem we're trying to solve. But they're kind of always on the cutting edge, and then we're trying to kind of integrate that into our system, make sure that we keep a continuous feedback of information back into them so they can retrain. We've got data labeling, all sorts of like fun ML engineering type problems to solve. So that's relatively new for us, but I still think we were pretty far ahead of things. I think we started that in about 2019.
Right. Yeah, which is kind of like a sweet spot of when everybody was getting into this with like data and everything. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been 10 years at Yext, and tell us a little bit about like even before we talk about Yext a little bit, how did a young Matt Bowman decide like this is what he wants to do, for life
Mm-hmm.
and play golf? So,
Yeah, so I like calling like harkening back to like the original computer that we had. It was a Commodore 64, and
okay.
I would just like kind of play around with that. We bought it from a neighbor that came with a whole box full of 5 and a quarter floppy disk games, and so I was busy with those, and then I realized that, oh, this is actually pretty cool. I wonder if I could make something that did something on the computer. So I messed around with that a bit. We got a 386. I started doing QBasic. So I mean, I've been doing this since I've been interested in computers since I was about 8 or 9. It's kind
Nice.
of been like a lifelong thing. Although I was like, let's be practical. When I went to college, I was like, you should be a doctor. So I started the pre med track. Quickly realized I was like, you know what I really like to do? I really like to write software. So that was kind of where my path uh, returned to home and started going for the software route. So yeah, that was really how I got into it. Really loved it. I developed some software that I ended up selling to local swim clubs.
Nice.
Uh, yeah, so it was kind of just like a lot of fun. I would just sit and program all day. It was outside of
Yeah.
swimming, which was
Yeah.
a full time activity. That was what I was doing.
That's amazing. I mean, I have spoken to so many people, and it's so amazing to know different stories and beginnings, right? And especially like when somebody says I built a software and that's what I loved, like that was programming, So at the core of it, like even if you're a leader today, at the heart of it, you're still a programmer, So do you miss like working on hands-on code? Do you get to do that nowadays?
Oh man, not very much. No, I definitely miss it a lot. It was a very difficult. I would say that was probably the most challenging transition was knowing that I could participate in the actual coding, but knowing I wasn't supposed to. And so it was like kind of pulling yourself back, letting others make decisions, letting others kind of drive how we're going to architect things, and really like I'm there to kind of facilitate things and make sure that things go smoothly, and basically deal with the stuff that no one who wants to write code wants to deal with.
That's awesome. Yeah. So how do you feel like now that now you're at an elevated role, right? And the landscape of technology has changed so much in the last 20 years, right? Like the stuff that you kind of were working on basic, and we okay, at that time we were building websites, say on HTML, and then CSS was there, and now we've moved to React, and have this whole idea of building applications with like components and Next.js, lots of changes in at least front end development. And then mad amount of changes in like backend with like databases and cloud and everything. What's been your take on all of this?
Oh man. So I remember a lot of the software we wrote early on in my career was dedicated toward like Windows machines and Internet
Yeah,
Explorer, and really just making sure we had good support there. And then I remember kind of like people up in arms about how Internet Explorer was so non-standard, and like and then you started seeing build up on Firefox, and then kind of Chrome came out, and there was just all these sort of like changes there that were great developments because it did provide some level of standardization across all of those technologies, and made it easier to develop. I can't tell you the number of shims that we always had to introduce into all of our code in order to deal with all these, front end
changes. Yeah,
bugaboos. hmm but yeah, and after that, we used to be all on premise or all managed data center. We would drive there. We'd scan the back of our hand to get in. There'd be like a human trap in order to make sure that only one person was going in and out. Really cool data centers. But we used to be very much uh, inclined to do that sort of thing because it was like, well, you got to manage your own hardware because you got to know what kind of power you got. You don't want all this noisy neighbor stuff. And then we started experimenting a little bit more. Like I left that company, and I was working at a small software consulting firm, and our clients really needed us to stand things up cheap and quickly. And really, the only option there was to go with the cloud. You could stand up a full website, you could stand up a whole system for hundreds of dollars a year versus tens of thousands, which is what
right.
you'd probably be paying in a managed data center. So the innovation kind of like skyrocketed. And when I was originally skeptical and totally wrong, I'm all in now. We love going to the cloud because it allows us to control costs. It also allows us to expand uh, when we need to without having to be like, all right, let's go rack some more servers and accept this massive capital expenditure.
Right. So, I is at EX, are you guys like do you have like a multi-cloud strategy, or like all in on like say one particular cloud like AWS or Azure?
So originally we were all managed data centers. So the team that I originally joined with here, I had worked with it at the previous company, and so we were very much about our own hardware.
Right.
And so we had a big data center in Secaucus, New Jersey. We still do, and we've got a managed data center in Texas. But we just opened up a second sort of mothership in Europe, and that
Oh
is
wow.
entirely in the cloud. And so we do have support right now for GCP as well as AWS, and we were in Azure for a little bit, and we do plan to return to that. But we now have kind of, depending on the product, we have data centers kind of all over the place.
Right.
Cloud data centers all over the place.
Right. And I mean, what's your personal preference when you think about these deployments, and of course the scale and the robustness and the elasticity that you get with cloud? Do you feel like being all cloud makes sense, or do you think some sort of a hybrid makes sense, just to make sure that you have the freedom to kind of run your own stuff also and control it? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is that what where you lean?
I mean, I definitely would lean to cloud first, and then
Okay.
kind of once you realize or have stabilized, and once you've decided like we understand the workload, we understand this domain really well, we know what to expect from traffic, we know what to expect from all these different like aspects of how the system operates, how our customers interact with it. Uh, it can make sense to kind of do an on premise or a managed data center cloud of your own, running with one of these great orchestration frameworks like a Kubernetes or like a Nomad, which is what we use. Um, but I think generally I would always start out in the cloud. I think it just makes so much sense. It's so easy, and it is so inexpensive, and you can experiment and you can tune. And then once you're like, we're spending too much in the cloud,
Yeah.
and we could easily take this in house. We understand it. We can deploy it. As long as you're using a lot of these sort of like modular components, like the orchestration layer, like I mentioned, you can pretty easily just stand up a bunch of machines in a data center, deploy that to it, and get your code running out there.
Yeah, I mean it's exciting. I think I've said this before on podcast as well. Like I spoke to a bunch of people, and one of the person said like in 1999 I was writing my own database, and because Oracle was expensive, and then today he was like we have so many solutions. We can go to the cloud, we can run say cockroach db on the cloud, or we can select like a postgres database, or there is a plethora of technology available, and like kubernetes definitely is something that changed the game. So do you feel like this is, if you were born say like, or you were getting into tech today, do you think that's more exciting or is it exciting like 20 years ago when you had no documentation? You have to
Oh
kind of
man.
go to like so many different forums and places like find answers to it. No Stack Overflow. So what do
Hmm.
you think about that?
Honestly, I don't even remember where I would go to get my information. I
I know.
remember like building my first like Linux system, and like all I could get it to do was grayscale, and I was like, this is so frustrating. And you're looking at your drivers, you're looking at what graphics card you have. It was so challenging. I would say it was more of a slog, and you were far less productive. I'd say
Yeah.
today is probably a lot more exciting because you literally can stand something up. Like my son plays Minecraft, and we stood up like a Minecraft server. It took like no time.
Wow.
It was amazing. I mean, it's the sort of thing that you just like, I don't know, so cool. So I would say today is way more exciting,
Exciting. Yeah.
whereas back then it was a little more of a slog. And the other problem that you would have with your Linux machine is that you would you'd get it running, and then you couldn't connect to the internet, and you're like, oh no, now what am I going to do? You have to like go get a second computer to try and like find out
Like,
what's wrong with your driver for your Ethernet card.
oh yeah, yeah. I have done stuff where I would have the same program file running somewhere else, and then I would go line by line, compare where did I mess up the code, and then I would realize that I missed a bracket. Like debugging was like so difficult, at that time, But those were the days, I think folks who have gone through an experience like that, and now like with all of this, it's amazing, but at the same time, I think it just makes us so much more confident about what we are building, right? And so your
Hmm.
software engineering teams, the teams that you manage, what are the kind of things they're working on right now? In the sense, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been wrapping up some really big projects recently, so I guess I can probably touch on some of that. So, when I originally started working on our web publishing platform, our Pages product, we had kind of we were very early to the static generation game. I mean, this is something that more recently has become kind of a industry standard. This sort of I think they've retired the term, but it was like the Jamstack.
Yeah.
Uh, but the static generation, people are like, this is really great for sites that don't have tons of dynamic data, right? It allows things to like load up really quickly. You can get everything out to a CDN. It's just like the performance and the customer experience. They're not experiencing 5 second delays loading up a page, right? Because anyone who's seen a 5 second delay is like back and clicking on the
Gone.
next link, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gone. So we had a system that did that. It was our kind of our classic Pages system, but it was entirely internally managed. It was entirely serviced by our services team, which kind of limited, I think, our ability to use it. And we also kind of had some plans for this new system that was going to be based off of streaming data. So it was, you define your stream. What are the linkages? What are the data? From this like graph of information. And anytime something changes across that graph, we want to generate a new page or an update to that page, right? So you have to understand the linkages between all of the data points in order to do that. And so what we built was the stream system. Well, the stream system wasn't compatible with the old way pages were generated.
Right.
So we ended up building this new thing that we had called sites that allowed you to kind of use this streaming concept and generate pages on demand using your own code, running in kind of like serverless functions. We've got a whole like CI that we built for it. It was a really cool and fun project
Nice.
to work on. And then so we did that. Our streams project was really big, and it's really mostly an internal thing. But in terms of the power that it's going to give us in the future, I think it's pretty incredible. Let me think. What else have we been working on? Um, yeah, we're returning to our basics. But anyway, those are the two things that like come immediately to mind. Oh, we've been doing like the big move to standing up a European mothership. So a secondary mothership
Right.
was a massive undertaking, and really it forced us to think about how can we deploy our code in a much more modular fashion. Because you know when you build something organically, you end up with like network routes and like firewall rules and all sorts of like crazy stuff
Right.
that like you try to deploy it to like a fresh cluster and it just doesn't work. Like nothing
Yeah,
can
yeah,
communicate. Like everything's not working. So that was a really big undertaking. The team
right.
recently wrapped up.
Yeah, and I mean it. I mean, and setting up anything in Europe is uh, becoming more and more interesting, right? Because of all the new like regulations that they have, and compliances that you have to follow. So, does your product have to like adhere to the sovereignty laws and data sovereignty goals that Europe wants to maintain
Yeah, so GDPR was definitely a major driver for our
for you
decision to
guys?
do this. I mean, as I mentioned, it was a massive undertaking, and there wasn't incredible demand from the European clients because what they were seeing with the performance of the system was generally fine. Like they didn't really
Right,
have any issues with it. But once the sovereignty stuff started coming in, they started getting concerned, and they were like, "Look, we don't want to deal with all this like silly stuff. Can we get migrated over to Europe?" And we are like, well, we can't really migrate you to Europe until we build an entirely new Yext system over there.
right.
So, so yeah, it was largely driven by that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I don't know if you're following, like AWS last week announced that they are building an AWS cloud that is only for Europe, not just region. It's just an entire cloud environment that will work only in Europe, which is pretty interesting. I know Google's committed to that as well, but I think they kind of announced it. So I think the whole idea over there also is like that only European employees are going to be working in those data centers. So there are very strict laws, and it's
Hmm.
pretty interesting how that's shaping up. What
Yeah.
what? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say I wasn't aware of that in particular, but it sounds almost like a FedRAMP. It's something that's like totally
Yes.
isolated, follows a very set like strict set of rules, and as you mentioned, like who's working there, who's accessing the data there, where are they located? There's a lot of stuff there that we're trying to figure out, and I think the lawyers are even struggling to figure out what exactly to do.
Yeah, I think, and it's a good value prop, right? Like if you're being pushed in a position where you have to like contain everything, and I think the best way is what you put, like it's like a FedRAMP for Europe, but it only works in Europe, kind of a cloud
Hmm.
environment. What
Yeah.
else does your team kind of use in terms of technology? Like you mentioned Kubernetes, obviously, and Nomad, and
Hmm.
something that you've like. Tell me a little bit more about what do you guys use for your front end applications, and I mean, you don't
Hmm.
have to give any secret sauce if you have any, but just generally like for folks to know, like how are companies like yours that are leading the path in this space, what kind of stuff that you use to kind of build this kind of an experience?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the challenge with leading the pack is that you're kind of constantly in a state of migration,
Right.
and so if you looked at our stack, 5-6 years ago, it would look very different from the stack you see today. But when it comes to like our primary stack, we're using React for our front ends. We still have Play, like Java Play servers, kind of hosting our web stuff because there is just a massive amount of stuff that we're running on there. That is something that we're kind of like in the midst of a bit of a migration, just trying to like feel it out, see what we can do, see what makes sense. Um, so yeah, we've got React on our front end. We're using Google's Closure compiler in
Oh,
order to compile our JavaScript, which is kind of like a throwback. A lot of people aren't even familiar with that, but it
yeah.
was kind of a big deal at the time. It does tree shaking, like you kind of like get these small compact binaries, which was a really big deal, especially if we were trying to service low internet areas. But generally speaking, we're dealing with business customers who have a business internet connection that are using their computer to do the work that they're doing.
Mm,
So for
right.
us, it's not as much of a differentiator to have these like micro binaries. So kind of moving away from that, because there are some like kind of gotchas. They've got a thing called advanced compilation, which restricts the like some of the things that you can do with JavaScript, but it also helps it kind of like do like trace through and see what's being used and what's not being used, so that it can actually like chop out whole functions or whole
Right.
files that aren't ever being touched by the code. But it's a little bit challenging because if you compile it not in advanced locally, because advances can take some time, there's a chance that when you do compile in an advanced mode, it won't work.
Oh,
I don't
interesting.
like that. I don't like that from a
That's
developer standpoint.
unpredictability. Yeah,
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 exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So we're kind of moving away from that, but yeah, React front, Java Play, but we are using a lot of Go now. We've got a significant amount of our system running in Go,
Yeah.
and it's a very slim HTTP server that's doing
It's,
all the
so
Go web
we
serving.
can come back to this. Like, I mean, I want you to continue, obviously, but is Go because you have a lot of developers who like Go? They're saying that this is the right place because I've seen a lot of developers who love Go just the way it is. Is
Hmm.
it because of that, or is it like you just company felt like Go is a language that you need to get to?
So yeah, I've got some insider information on this one. A good friend and former colleague who's now working with other former colleagues at a startup. Uh, he kind of fell in love with Go, and
Mm.
he at the time was a very influential member of our technology team. And he was like, "Guys, we should use Go. I really like it." He ended up doing a ton of work to make it so that the entire team could participate and use Go within our ecosystem. Like, right, it's an unbelievable undertaking to actually do something like that, and he did
Right.
it all on his own and kind of got us to the point where we could use it. So yeah, it was kind of like a personal preference thing for him,
Yeah.
but it's kind of spidered out into different parts of the organization. I think a lot of people really do appreciate the simplicity.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, yeah, I know I stopped you, but yeah, go ahead, continue. So you
Hmm.
use Go, React, and what else do you guys use? Yeah,
Yeah. So depending on where we are, if we're in kind of our managed data centers, then you're going to probably see a bunch of MySQL servers. Because I mean, again, we're like a 17-year-old company at this point, like
right,
2006. So we were using MySQL a long time ago, and we really haven't seen any compelling reason to leave it. I think if we were, I'd probably say Postgres or something like that. It's a little bit more
right,
fun. But anyway, so that's our primary relational database. Um, kind of communication between our different systems. We wrote a homegrown RPC uh, library, and it has served us really well. It's actually really great, pretty incredible undertaking, and we kind of see it. We're trying to move over to gRPC to kind of replace it
right,
but you kind of see like where we were really strong with that system. Like it's able to handle just an unbelievable amount of traffic, and gRPC is kind of like choking under the load in some cases. So it's kind of funny to see that we definitely wrote something that solved the problems that we were facing, as
right,
opposed to kind of a general system that solves a lot more problems, but maybe not necessarily as narrow as what we're looking for. So
right.
we're moving to gRPC, but currently we're still on what we call Yext RPC. Um, for message handling, we use RabbitMQ
Oh yeah,
internally, and that's, I mean, it's solid as a rock. As long as you don't abuse it, it is
yeah.
just unbelievably reliable.
Right. Yeah. I think I mean, again, comes down to scale, right? Like, I think your use cases have a certain scale and it works for you. I've seen experiences where trying to rabbit MQ and it just like, it's just at some point I'm like, this doesn't scale and I cannot live with it. Like, and my experiences is working with use cases that require like scale and resiliency. And there is this need for like terabytes of data to flow between systems
Hmm.
and stream in real time. So I think in those cases, like I've seen Kafka along with like a great CDC on a database work really well. But
Hmm.
I feel agree with you that RabbitMQ use case where fits the bill, it fits the bill really well. So and it's
Yeah,
been around for such a long time, right?
it
So
has. Yeah, and it was written in Erlang, which is probably not a lot of people know that, but that ran
yeah,
like the entire European telecommunications system for. I'm not sure if it still is, but it
yeah,
might be. Um, yeah, so we are using Kafka as well. I think one of the challenges with RMQ, at least from my perspective, is that like it can hold so much data and you don't know what's in there. So you
right,
have to figure out ways to inspect it. Like, how do I know what's in this queue? Like, what's
right,
backed up? When is this customer's problem going to be solved? You just don't know because it's opaque. You're
yeah,
like, well, it's somewhere in the queue. It's somewhere in there. And then you can also like run into issues where you have these sort of massive fan outs where a single message will go into a queue and all of a sudden you have thousands of outbound messages as a result because everyone's subscribed, or we've got like 50,000 exchanges because when we wrote it at the beginning only like 5 customers were using this, but now we've got everyone using it. And
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, we're using Kafka though, for as well as Mirror Maker in order to transfer data to our different. We've got our source data region, which is kind of like the mothership, and then we have our consumer serving regions, and those are kind of scattered around the globe.
Nice.
and that's where kind of all the customer facing stuff. So when I say customer, I mean it's really more our customer's customer. So
Right,
like
right.
someone who visits a website that's hosted by our Pages product, that's where
That's
it's going to
cool.
be served from.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I was just curious to kind of like, you have all of this technology available. Like, so your software engineers, like, if they have to do any sort of R&D, do you have like any protocols around, not protocols, but more like process around how do you foster, research and development, and how does that flow into your product life cycle, stuff like that, that you
Mm-hmm.
manage?
Yeah, I probably tend to be too open to new technologies, and would kind of have us on like 50 different stacks because it's so fun to see them and you're like, oh, this actually solves this problem really well. But at
Right,
scale, I mean, and scale is relative. We've got 150, 170 engineers now. Uh, uh, and when you have that many people and you have like a massively diverse set of technologies, it can slow people down, and it can inhibit movement across the organization. Like if
right,
we need, like what we just did, we just moved a handful of people from a bunch of different teams over to a different area. If we were all using disparate technology, not only do they have to learn like the problems that are being solved by that code, but they also have to learn how to code in that language and do it effectively. Like we
right,
can learn languages pretty easily. People can observe and they can read, and they can, we've got autocomplete and copilot. But ultimately, it comes down to like, if you don't know exactly how the code operates, if you don't understand maybe how the JVM operates, garbage collection, how it works, you can write some really suboptimal stuff. And if it gets out into the wild,
yeah.
it can really cause you some headaches.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, there is a difference between somebody who can code, somebody who understands the code he's writing, and somebody who copy pastes the code and understands the code, right?
Yeah.
So that you kind of segued into like a space which is like a mammoth of a conversation, right? But we can touch on it. Is you brought up Copilot and the whole idea of AI.
Hmm.
How do you feel about all of that impacting your teams and where all of this is going right now?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I probably like get too excited about these things, and my belief is them as being like a silver bullet is probably
Yeah.
too strong. Uh, we started with kind of a little pilot program for Copilot this spring, and we rolled it out to anyone who wanted it. We said like, hey, get on our license and use it and test it out, see what you do or see what you think. And we did a couple surveys throughout the period to try and get a sense of like, what was going on. And while I think people did find it like interesting and in some ways helpful, I just don't think it's where it's not at that point where it's like, oh my god, it's amazing, I couldn't code without it. I think people are
Right.
probably at that point with autocomplete, but I don't think Copilot's quite to that point. But it is
Yeah.
exciting. Uh,
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I agree with you. I think there's some cool things that they are shipping out in Copilot. But again, I mean, before Copilot, there was this in if you use Code, VS Code, you had this package called Tab 9, and that would kind of autocomplete stuff for you. That was really good,
mhm.
So, and also, I'm not like, sometimes when I get boilerplate code, I'm so skeptical of the code. Like, where did it come from? So I'm like,
Right.
I have a distrust. So I will actually double check everything that I am writing, and I mostly code whenever I get to code. Is either right now I'm doing it in Node, React, or JavaScript, basically with or
Hmm.
Python. Like, those are my two go tos, and I've been trying to do some Go stuff. But this stuff around AI is changing the way we perceive problems right now. So I know your search product specifically has, you have added some AI capabilities to that. So does your ML and AI team kind of, are they exploring all the amazing APIs that OpenAI is releasing and testing them out? And you don't have to tell me, I mean, if there's a secrets around it, but I mean, I would be surprised if you guys are not. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some secret sauce, but most of the secret sauce is probably in our people. I think when
Nice.
you look at the capabilities of what's out there, it's pretty incredible. But then you see what OpenAI just did with their stuff, and they were like, they made obsolete a ton of people that were kind of just piggybacking on their technology.
Right.
So yeah, what we do want to make sure that we're doing though is paying attention to the different offerings they do have, and we've spun up a machine learning engineering team, and really what their goal is to kind of act as the bridge between our normal. That sounds bad, but our engineering teams,
Yeah.
our non ML engineering teams, and our data science team. So our data scientists can focus on data science problems and kind of like going out there and figuring out, how do we make the best use out of our A100s that we've got, because those are expensive as hell.
Right.
And then our engineers can also say, like, we know there's a problem, or our product managers can say, we know there's a problem, we know that there's a solution out there that we've already developed, and that they can actually interface with it. So we've got our kind of gateway for all of our we call it our data science gateway, that acts as kind of the broker between our internal systems and the data science machine learning models, the training. There's tons of data that we're just throwing off from these things that are then being used in retraining. So yeah,
Right.
I would say that gateway also, though, has a way to open up to OpenAI, to models potentially being run by like Hugging Face. So there's definitely, like, we want to make sure that we're capitalizing on all the things that can help our customers the most, but we are doing a ton of work internally to develop new models and kind of
Yeah.
train them on customers' own data, because they really like that
Yeah.
when the AI sounds like someone who works
Perfect.
there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think the challenge is that the speed at which this is developing is so difficult for us to keep up. Like, for example, especially, I mean, when companies are working on this on the side, or somebody like me who's testing it out without the enterprise umbrella of security, and making sure that it does what it does, because at the end of the day, you're trying to build a product that is AI driven and helps your customers, and say it says something, it can impact their revenue, right? so
Hmm.
so so I mean, that's the piece that I'm shocked by, that the pace at which this is innovating is extremely wild. um,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
there's been this challenge, like, and I'm sure you're aware of it. This big challenge where AI bots will kind of go off the reservation. You can think of
hallucinations,
like
yeah.
Bing and getting, the Bing bot. I can't remember the name of it, but just getting upset with the user. Like
Yeah.
getting upset. It's
Yeah.
really not angry at them, but it sounds like it's getting upset with them. Uh,
Right.
and you don't want your customers getting yelled at by your AI bot, right? That's a really bad experience. So
Yeah.
what we've done in order to kind of prevent that, and I think it's becoming more of an industry standard, was we figured out, because our search product was so good at like finding the information, using an inbound query, using NER, like trying to figure out like what is the intent of this search, not just like taking the words and doing a tiff diff into an index, right? We're doing a lot more intelligent stuff. We're examining the query. We're hitting a bunch of different endpoints. We're figuring it out. Anyway, that's our search product. We will actually do that with their query, with their chat question, and then we'll transform it into something that we think would be a good search.
Hmm.
We then use that search in order to query our knowledge base, or our customers' knowledge base, and then we use that to formulate and feed that back into the AI to respond. So
Right. Right.
that kind of keeps it a little bit more narrow, a little bit
Oh
more on
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I
reservation.
mean, what you're saying is, I mean, it's not completely a RAG system. I mean, but a RAG, basically, you have added your own knowledge, and you've taken the prompt to kind of get a better response out, just or
Hmm.
over just relying on the AI's response. I don't
Yeah.
know if this is a tidbit that I can share with you. Is like about a week ago, there's this company called Vectra. Who released an open source model? It's on Hugging Face. It's called hallucination evaluation model, and what they're doing, it's like an open standard where they have taken a small model that has been around for like a while. They've fine-tuned it, and then across that model, what it does is it looks at questions and it summarizes responses, and then it looks at GPT-4, GPT 3.5, llama, all of these models, and rates their results on how the hallucination levels are. And
Oh,
it's
that's interesting.
interesting. So they're going to, like, it's open source, and you can kind of look at those in your context as well. But the interesting findings from that was that GPT-4 and 3.5 have the lowest hallucination rates, whereas Google's Palm models have the worst hallucination rates. So that's why nobody's using. There's like a direct correlation there. But
Yeah.
but what you're trying to build, sounds like, is the right approach to implementing AI for enterprises, or and
Hmm.
B2B customers, right? And I'm glad to hear that. I mean, that's the consensus amongst seasoned engineers and teams and leaders. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you still get sometimes the hallucinations. You just don't get the AI yelling at the customer
Yeah,
for
yeah,
prompt engineering them. Uh, but you get sometimes where, and we've been able to really like do a great job eliminating this. But early on we were seeing stuff where you would ask it a question and it would just like make up an answer,
yeah,
and you were like, you don't actually know that. That is
yeah.
not nowhere in the search results did this information come up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's like classic hallucination, right? So that's where it is. But it's cool to know. Let's pivot a little bit, like Matt. I mean, one of my most the most exciting thing when I was seeing you come on board was like learning about your leadership philosophies, right? Like obviously you've been a software engineer, but leading a team now of people and guiding, and you have to make sure that principally they're driving to outcomes and things like that. So what are
Hmm.
your leadership philosophies that you've developed that you can share with everyone?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a really good book called The Ideal Team Player that we've modeled a lot of our core values off of. And really what that comes down to is like we're looking for people that are hungry, people who want to like learn, people who want to grow, people who want to like find the next thing that they can do to help make an impact. We're looking for people who are humble. We don't want people who think their stuff is too good and no one's can approach them and ask them a question. We want people who share uh, the credit for things that get done, and we want people who have kind of a higher emotional quotient. We're looking for higher EQ folks. We call it smart. Well,
Right.
Ideal Team Player calls it smart, and we our behavioral is entirely focused around that. And it's sorry, a behavioral interview, the one that we do for inbound folks, and it's delivered only by our most senior people on our team, and it is also the way in which we evaluate people's performance. So like really what we're looking for and what we found based on this model is that like you can have some really high productivity stuff. You're not dealing with silly sort of interpersonal issues with people. Everyone can kind of like focus in around like what are the things that are going to move the business forward. And I think what we found is that generally it helps increase morale, it helps increase output, and we're not even looking for output from purely from a Yext thing. Obviously it's great for us as a company to have high output engineers, but really, what this means is that we've got developers who are learning, we've got developers who are growing, we've got developers who are becoming more marketable, and they're
Right.
becoming excellent at what they do. And
Right.
and for me, that's really the rewarding part is like seeing people who came in, not asking questions because they're used to school, where you're not supposed to like work with others, you're supposed to kind of like solve the problems yourself, and seeing them grow into either managers or into super high output ICs or into architects is it's very satisfying to see that and see what they can produce.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that philosophy is so good. Like an environment of openness where there is no fear to ask questions, right? Like early on in my career, I mean, I was also like, so afraid to ask questions. And then I got introduced to open source, and where we were on Discord channels or Slacks. I'm just seeing randomly people throwing their errors and saying, I'm getting this error. What does this mean? And then there would be somebody nice enough to, and it kind of opens up your thought to the fact that, well, not everybody knows everything, and
Mm-hmm.
you can ask questions and you can grow. And I think my growing has happened through learning from these people with this level of humility. So I think
Yeah.
it's great to have that. Have you had experiences where you have an engineer who just struggles to like who does great work but struggles to communicate how good his work is? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think I think that is the problem that we probably encounter the most is that like
Yeah.
the folks that really are kind of like really have embody the core values of the organization. They're not going to toot their own horn. So we need to count on our managers to be like doing that for them,
Right. Right.
because they're gonna the first thing you ask them is like, wow, that's an amazing system, how'd you build it? And they're like, well, actually I only like helped out in this area. They're gonna like push away the credit. Um, so yeah, how do we deal with that? It's really, our hope is that our managers are keeping an eye on this stuff, they understand what's going on, and all of our managers are engineers or like current or former engineers. So we've got people who understand what it takes to build systems, who understand like, what it takes to manage a system that's gone from new to like production to legacy. You know, it's just there's so much that you can kind of learn over the course of managing the life cycle of software, and I think it helps them understand. I'm working with this legacy system. No surprise that like our regression tests tend to fail. You
Hmm.
know, when people make big changes, like
Yeah,
that's just how it works.
that's
Whereas maybe
nature of
someone
it.
less seasoned would be like, "What the heck? Like, what? You know, why are you making this change and breaking everything all the time?" It's like, well, this system's a little brittle. So,
Yeah, I get it. Have you like in this scenario, right? Like you have a team of 170 people. How do you foster innovation, like within like new product development and things like that? Like, do you have like a design team, a software engineering team, an architect team, working
mhm,
together with like a team that has data from what the next requirements are? Like, how do you operate in this
mhm.
environment?
So for incredibly new stuff, our former CEO, who I'm still friends with, and was I started working with him in 2005. He was kind of like, he had wild ideas, and he would like come up with them, and he would figure out how to market them, and that was kind of the driver of like innovation. That wasn't necessarily innovation from use this neat technology. It was more like a product innovation. So there's that type of innovation. Then there's the other type of innovation, which is like, how do we embrace new technologies and actually make sure that we're staying current?
Yeah,
Um, so the way that we're organized is we have our product areas. There's a head sort of engineering lead for each of our product areas. There's a product manager for each of our product areas. And they work together kind of on the roadmap, building user stories. And then we've got within each one of our product areas, we have what we call a group architect. And so this is kind of our top level engineer for that organization.
got it.
And they're in charge of how's the system perform? What are the error rates? What's the regression? How frequently are we having regressions? They're kind of like they own the capabilities and the functionality of the system and how it's built. Um, and then we have our sort of teams that have tech leads, and those tech leads are in charge of various projects. So a project will come in, they'll work with the group architect to kind of bounce ideas off each other as to how it's going to be designed, and then the team swarms it and works on it. So that's
Nice.
kind of how we're structured.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
our
I mean,
product managers and UX, we've toyed around with that. How do we get our UX like design team integrated with the developers? And there's been sort of a drive for like, well, we should design based on persona because that person understands that user. And really, if we're being user focused, this kind of makes sense. The challenge with that is that this designer is now working with 10 different products and they
mm,
don't know them that well. So it
right.
can be challenging, right? The other way to do it is to say, let's assign a designer to a product area. That's good because they understand the product area really well and they probably can really make great decisions about that. But they're not really necessarily going to be making the same decisions with this design that some other designers making in another product that
Right.
lives right next door in the software.
Yeah. So because you want all the designs to kind of have some sort of a commonness or parity and look the same, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How they function. Where is there a call to action? Like, where's the title? Where is all these sorts of things that, like,
Right.
in my mind, I just am like, well, if we can copy somebody else's website, that's hopefully good enough. That's that's how
Yeah.
I
I mean,
design.
yeah, but but these are the challenges, right? Like that you have to solve on a day-to-day basis, and like that ecosystem that you described of how you guys operate is like it's great to know. But
Hmm.
again, there's so much happening, right? Like in your role, you have to manage your teams. You have to kind of speak forward to your stakeholders and drive innovation and make sure that everybody in your team is also growing themselves, becoming better at it. But
Hmm.
you also have the challenge of like the technology. There's so much going on. So what do you do to like keep up with what's happening in the space, stay up to date, and kind of bring a distilled version of, hey, we need to like start looking at it this way and start thinking about it? How do you manage that?
Hmm. Well, listen to the Big Ideas in App Architecture podcast, of course.
Thank
I
you
have
so much.
gotten some good ideas. Yeah, I have gotten some good ideas from that. I was reminded of the Golden Path
Yeah.
by one of your guests. I was like, oh yeah. So I looked at it and I was like, oh my god, we should be doing this.
Yeah.
So definitely that. But 10 p.m. Twitter scrolling.
Right.
I used to be much more active on Hacker News. I haven't been on there in a while, but that's a really good place to stay abreast of what's happening. Um, but I also lean pretty heavily. We've got some just very, very brilliant engineers that are dedicated to their craft and know it and love it, and they're constantly investigating new stuff. And I remember when I first joined, one of our engineers was like writing his own, like, it wasn't even a test app. It was like, it was a big thing, and he was writing it all in TypeScript, and he was like, yeah, I really like TypeScript, it's pretty cool. This is like 9 years ago, so
There are a bunch of people like that who love TypeScript, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, I've met a few too.
So yeah, really, for me, I would love to be able to help like guide the architecture and make those decisions, but really, when it comes down to it, I'm relying so heavily on our engineers and our architects to help drive those decisions and test things out. Like, we've got guys, there's different like personas, right? You've got some people who love to work with tried and true stuff and just like grind out new stuff, boom, boom, boom,
Right,
and then you've got other people who are like, I want to test out something new, and I don't care if I have to throw it away, but I just love being able to test out this new technology.
right.
And getting them in the right roles and having them do those things is just so important to kind of staying on top of the innovation and staying on top of the new technologies.
Right. And I think it goes back to what you just shared like a few minutes ago about how you hire and the kind of ethos they need to have to work with a team like yours. So it all stems from having those principles built in, and that is driven through leadership, obviously. I mean, it's amazing that, you have this thing that is going on. I'm super excited to kind of learn more and follow. I think Yext has a really, really amazing, product set, and it's good to know how you are changing the world with like this B2B. I'm super excited about the AI stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, as we come close to the end of the podcast, I mean, I didn't even realize, I looked at it, it's already 50 minutes. So, yeah.
Hopefully, everyone's not asleep.
Nah, nah. I think it's been such a fun conversation. I always ask people who have been in the space for a while, because we have so many young folks who also listen to the podcast. What is your advice to teens or young engineers who are like looking to advance and learn and
Hmm.
grow in this space right now?
Yeah. So this is really geared toward the more junior engineers, the folks that are just getting started on their career. I would look at the best people in your organization and try and do what they do, and then try and do it better. Because if your company's hiring properly, you probably can do better than that person. I
Mhm.
know most of the engineers here can probably smoke me when it comes to anything like this. So I would say just work really hard. Make sure that you're working well with others, and yeah, just like become excellent at what you do. That is the way you will grow your career, and everyone will know it, and people will know you by reputation, and that's a really important aspect of becoming great as a software engineer.
Awesome. I spoke like a true veteran of the game, Matt.
Those are all the
So
people I want to hire.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. I mean, when the episode releases, and if you see a bunch of people hit you up on LinkedIn and asking for a job, well, your goal is completed. All right. So, if you want to look for Matt, look for him on LinkedIn. Matt Bowman, VP at Yext. And I think, is there any other place where you publish stuff or you like speak your mind off apart from Twitter, for people to follow you?
Oh man, no, when I was working at a smaller consulting firm, one of the important things was showing that thought leadership. So I was very active on Twitter, and I was posting kind of all the time. But I've definitely fallen off on that a little bit. So I would say the best place to see what I'm doing or thinking is probably on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to inspire you to like start writing again. I feel like everybody should write something, because I think there's a lot of difference you can make. So, I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's awesome.
I
Well,
might
thank you.
consult ChatGPT to have it write it for me because I'm
Why
such a
not?
terrible writer.
Why not? You can actually take a bunch of your existing writings, make your own GPT, which is like an AI bot that OpenAI just released. Train that GPT to write like you, and then just sit and make some money on the side.
It's a good idea. Let me just jot that down.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I gave a lot of ideas. That's big ideas in app architecture.
Yeah.
Anyways, Matt, I mean, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I mean, I'm super excited to follow what you do next, and I mean, I hope this is just the first conversation we are having, and hopefully have you on again and talk about some more fun things.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a ton of fun. I really appreciate it, and you make the experience so easy. So I appreciate it. Thanks
Hey,
so
learning
much.
learning right now. Thank you so much. All right.